you for joining us here today.
Hello, Shrabani, I can't hear you.
Ma'am has been logged out for some reason. She's joining back.
Sorry for again technical glitches. I'm back. I was logged out of the system. It looks like the system thinks I'm not very important anymore in this dash event. Anyway, I'm sorry for that. I would like to also, your introduction will be from the students with respect to each of the panelists who've joined here. But I think I just welcome former Ambassador Arjun Asrani. I also welcome former Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, and also our current ambassador in Japan, who is really taken time out from his busy schedule to be with us. I think it's a great honor, sir, because we now have a person who went initially and the person who is right now holding forth, along with the former Ambassador Bambawale, who was in 2014 to 2009 to 2014, held the Joint Secretary of East Asia desk, which was at a point of time when we had a few important dealings. So I think for my students and the audience at large, it would be a very interesting session. And I would not waste time with anything else, but to ask my students to take over and formally introduce so that we can go along with this session. Thank you.
To start, Shravani?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I'm looking at either Tunia and Abhijit. Yes, please start your introduction.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. A very good morning to everyone, and welcome to the second day of the conference, India-Japan at 70, Introspection, Insights and Initiative. My name is Nabam Tunia, and I'm a doctoral candidate at Center for East Asian Studies, and together with Abhijit Singh, we will be introducing the panelists for the first session of the day, Spotlight on India-Japan Relations at 70, in conversation with Indian diplomats. This session is the highlight of the conference as we bring across various diplomats that has helped in shaping India-Japan relations through their relentless services, and 70 years of Japan-India relation is a culmination of the years of their effort. It is an honor to welcome you all. Professor Shrabani Roy Chaudhary will be chairing the session. She is a professor in Japanese Studies in Center for East Asian Studies, JNU. Thank you, ma'am, for chairing the session. We have with us today Ambassador Arjun Asrani. He joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1957. He had 3 assignments in Japan, starting as 3rd Secretary in the Indian Embassy in 1960 and ending as ambassador from 1988 to 1992. In between, he was deputed as Joint Secretary in India's Finance Ministry from 1979 to 81, mostly dealing with Japanese official development assistance to India. His other assignments included Minister in Indian Embassy, Washington, Consul General, New York, and Ambassador to Libya and Thailand. Post-retirement, he was a member of the erstwhile India-Japan Study Committee and later a member of the National Security Board. He was awarded Grand Cordon of the Order of the Rising Sun by the Emperor of Japan in 2004. Thank you, sir, for gracing us with your presence. With us, Ambassador, he was a member of the Indian Foreign Service from 1918. He was India's ambassador to Bhutan, Pakistan, and China. Ambassador Bamba was stationed in Washington, D.C. from 2004 to 2007 during the Indo-US nuclear deal, which transformed ties between the two countries. He was India's first Consul General in Guangzhou, China from 2007 to 2009, and he was director of the Indian Culture Center at Berlin from 1994 to 1998. Ambassador Bambawale also worked in the Prime Minister's office from 2002 to 2004, and at the Ministry of External Affairs, he was the Joint Secretary for East Asia from 2009 to 2014. He has dealt with China for 15 years of his 34-year diplomatic career and is currently a distinguished professor at Faculties of Humanities and Social Sciences at Symbiosis International University, Pune. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. And now I'll be handing it over to Abhijit.
Thank you, Tanya. Currently joining from Tokyo, it is my honor to introduce Ambassador Sanjay Kumar Verma. He's an officer of the 1988 batch of Indian Foreign Service. He was stationed at the Consulate General of India, Hong Kong, and at the Embassy of India in China, Vietnam, and Turkey, before serving as the Consul General of India in Milan, Italy. Ambassador Verma was also the Indian ambassador to the Republic of Sudan. Following his tenure in Sudan, Ambassador Verma served as Joint Secretary, Global East Aid Management in Ministry of External Affairs, New Delhi. Prior to his arrival in Japan as the Ambassador of India, he was posted in Ministry of External Affairs, New Delhi, as Additional Secretary, Administration, and was also in charge of the Cyber Diplomacy Division. Ambassador Verma is deeply passionate about information technology, artificial intelligence, cyber diplomacy, delivery of people-centric services using interactive technologies, guiding and facilitating small business and investors. He reads, writes, and speaks Hindi, English, and Mandarin. He has conversational skills in Bengali as well. I will now hand over to Professor Sarvani Roy Chaudhary, who will chair this session.
Thank you, Tunia and Abhijit, for your introduction. We would like to now conduct this in a conversational mode. To the audience, please hold on to your questions. You would be required to raise your hands and we will follow it up. Currently, we will start by, I think, seeking each ambassador to give a few of their thoughts with respect to their tenure in as policymakers with respect to Japan. So we would start with Arjun Asrani, sir, because being the oldest, you get your chance first, sir. Thank you. Sir, can you?
Yes.
Yeah. So
thank you for, I'm glad I'm still alive to be able to participate at the age of 88. But most of my memories are relating to the last century. Of course, so many good developments have happened during the current century, but I'm sure my colleagues will speak on that. What I remember is that the 1950s, right up to 1961, was a golden period in India-Japan relations in the last century. Why? Because the memories were fresh in the Japanese minds that it was an Indian judge, R.B. Pal, who had the courage to be the only judge amongst 20 or 21 international judges to say not guilty regarding the Japanese. And that was a great relief to the Japanese, this dissenting judgment. And then, instead of being a party to the San Francisco Treaty of 1951, where Japan was treated as a defeated country, we signed a separate treaty with Japan in 1952, renouncing any claims to reparations. Japan, on its part, was kind enough to allot us prime properties for our embassy office and residence. And our office, Chancery, as you know, is on the moat of the Imperial Palace, which is famous for its sakura season. Now, India's warm support for post-war Japan also resulted in helping Japan to get admission to United Nations, to the Bandung Conference, to Asian Games, etc. Nehru had, as Prime Minister, had a very successful visit to Japan in 1957. I wasn't there, but I heard when I reached there in 1960 that as many as 6 cabinet ministers of Japan had turned up at the airport to receive him. So throughout the 1950s and 60s, India remained a faithful supplier of iron ore and cotton, which were the basic two materials required by the steel industry and the textile industry of Japan. These were the early industries of Japan. And supplies were just not available from elsewhere. We were the main supplier. And we charged reasonable rates. We did not exploit them. So they were very grateful to us for all these things. That is why perhaps the Crown Prince and Princess of Japan visited India in November 1960, and also they were present at the inauguration of our India International Center in Delhi. And they were a handsome couple. They proved very popular at that time in India. Then there were two successive Japanese prime ministerial visits, Mr. Kishi in 1957 and Ikeda in 61. Uh, they both made New Delhi as one of the first stop before going to USA, etc., because they wanted to show that India also supported them. India was an important country as a leader of the non-aligned and developing world. So before going to USA, they would first make a stop in India. So this was the kind of relationship we had. Then in 1958, India became the first country to be extended Japanese yen credits. From then on, the most important part of our relationship became the Japanese official development assistance to India. Because on the political side, it went cold because they went more deeply into the Western Pact, whereas they saw us in the Cold War. They saw us as closer to the Soviet Union. So there I found, even during my period as the third secretary, the Guy Musho, the Foreign Office, was rather cool to India because they saw us as in the adversarial camp. However, the economic importance of India remained in their mind, and therefore they continued to give aid, project aid, and other technical cooperation. What people don't know is that project aid, when given by Japan, results in business for Japanese companies to get contracts in India for building those projects. So that brings the two countries closer further. And because of that, because of the growing ODA of Japan to India, all the major trading companies of Japan had a presence in India, even when our imports were not free. It was mainly for the projects, because they got the projects and they imported the raw materials and construction machinery and whatever for setting up those projects. Then this happy chapter ended, as I said, in the on the political side in the 60s. It was to take 23 years for a Japanese prime minister to visit India. I think it was in 1984. And because the Rajiv Gandhi government in the 80s and even otherwise, there had been some rethinking in India about opening up the economy. So that attracted the Japanese again. But it was really in 91 that I got the greatest satisfaction of any event in my entire career in the Foreign Service. We were in dire straits as far as foreign obligations were concerned, foreign exchange crisis. And no one was ready to help us. We had applied to the IMF, but that was going to take 6 months to give us any positive result. So we would have had to declare bankruptcy in terms of payment of foreign loans. We owed a lot of money to banks. What we had done was we had borrowed short term for long term projects. That was a mistake Indians had made, and we were therefore not able to repay. Japan was the only country, and I had to work really hard to get appointments with the foreign minister and the finance minister for Mr. Yashwant Sinha, who was then the finance minister. Finally, I got the appointment with the foreign minister. He said, I'm coming anyway, even though there was no appointment with the finance minister. I had put all my efforts, the people I knew in Sumitomo, Mitsui, Mitsubishi, who might have had contacts with the finance minister, to persuade the finance minister to give a meeting. It was only after Yashwant Sinha arrived, I received him at the airport, we went to the embassy and I got a phone call, finance minister has given an appointment. Once the appointment was given, we knew something would be coming. And they gave us a few $100 million, that's all we wanted really, to make immediate payments. In addition, of course, as you know, we sent our gold to Geneva for a loan against the gold from a consortium of banks, which again included the Bank of Tokyo. So this is how it was in the early 90s. And while Japan moved firmly into the US, this I've already said. Yes, the other part, let me just look at. Yes, the Indian government was very conscious of the fact that it needed to continue to improve relations with Japan. The sign of that was that in 1989, the Indian government observed 3 days official mourning on Emperor Showa's passing away. And later on, President Venkataraman attended the ceremonies following the passing away. This was in spite of the Cold War, etc. However, the Cold War itself ended in 1991, and that opened up a new series of Japanese companies sending delegations to India, because at the same time the economy was opening up by Dr. Manmohan Singh. So, but the Japanese would send delegation after delegation to study. They believe in long studies before they finally make up their minds. So before they could make up their minds, we had the nuclear explosion in 1998. And my other colleagues will dwell upon that. So really speaking, even the investments, joint ventures, etc., apart from the political and strategic interest in each other came only after the year 2000. And the year 2000 started pretty well with the visit of Prime Minister Modi, but my colleagues will dwell more on that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was very interesting to see you walk the road which we read in books as history. So it is interesting to listen from you on this account. Maybe at some point of time, we will have our students also talk to you and interview on your paths of walks that you've made. Can I then move to Professor Bombawale? Could you please, give your views with respect to the two main things? You executed the CEPA when the CEPA was inked, and two, about the nuclear civil deal that you went through, took our country through. It was been very important two documents which we constantly refer back to. So could you please dwell on that two incidents?
Yeah, thank you. As you had mentioned, Sravani, my experience with Japan was as Joint Secretary East Asia when I served for a longish period. And before that, I'd never ever been to Japan. But in that 4.5, 5-year period, I used to travel about 5 or 6 times each year to not merely Tokyo, but also to Nara, Kyoto, Osaka, etc. So that's when I really, dealt with Japan, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Of course, let me start by saying that it was a great pleasure to be part of this India-Japan journey, especially when it was on the upward curve. As Ambassador Asrani mentioned, that there were difficult days before that, and especially post our nuclear tests of 1998, all of us know how difficult the India-Japan relationship was. So it was really nice to be able to be part of this India-Japan journey when it was moving upward, and there was a lot of work to be done. As far as CEPA is concerned, I think it had already been signed, but there was a whole process of getting approvals from the Japanese parliament, etc., which took some time. And then it actually was implemented, when I was holding that position. I would, looking back, I think it's a big learning curve for India, that we need to do our own domestic homework much better on free trade agreements with other countries. And I believe that today we are actually doing that more intensively, working with our domestic industry to ensure that everything we want in a CEPA is included, or in an FTA is included in it. So I think this was one of the earliest FTAs signed by India, and it was a good learning curve. Let me also mention that, I remember very clearly that each time there was an annual summit and that the system had already started, there was a long joint statement to be negotiated. And I remember burning the midnight oil in the Japanese foreign ministry, the Gaimusho, doing these negotiations and so on. And on one occasion, I remember that Prime Minister Abe's flight was to land in Delhi. And as they were landing, we were still negotiating on the phone with some of his officials about such things. So those were long hours put in, but very exciting. And also now you can look back with great, happiness and pride. Let me, before I come to the nuclear deal, and I won't spend much time, I think one of the most critical visits to India, to Delhi, by Mr. Abe was when he was in between prime ministerships. So he had stepped down after his first term, and he was still to be elected in 2012. He came as an ordinary individual. He was a member of parliament, but as he himself described himself, as a backseat member of parliament, a junior member of parliament. And I think that was a very critical visit which he made, during which he was able to talk to a whole gamut of people in India, including having a meal and discussion with the then Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh. And I remember Ambassador Saiki was the Japanese ambassador in India. And that was the time when he built a rapport with Prime Minister Abe. So, and one last recollection before I come to the nuclear deal, which I'm not going to spend too much time on. But I remember many, many meetings in the Prime Minister's office on the dedicated freight corridor, the Western dedicated freight corridor, or the Delhi-Mumbai industrial corridor, etc. And eventually, there was a point of time when one of the principal secretaries to the Prime Minister used to point at me and say, "He is our Mr. Japan." So though I have been ambassador to China and I have dealt with China, I was thoroughly happy to be described in those days as Mr. Japan, as India's Mr. Japan, though there were so many others who contributed to the relationship. On the nuclear deal, I'll just say this, that, I was not expert on negotiating nuclear agreements with other countries. There were others in the ministry who were experts. But the leadership of the Ministry of External Affairs, in its wisdom, felt that with Japan, it has to be someone who has an idea and understands the sensitivities of this subject in Japan. And therefore, as the Joint Secretary in charge of East Asia, I was made the leader of the team. And I did learn a lot about nuclear matters in those discussions. But while I was there, it was a tough negotiation. I'm happy that we have been able to, agree to various parts, which then became part of the agreement. So I think I'm going to stop there, Srabani, and hand it back to you.
Thank you, Bambawale. It was interesting because when the DMIC got inked, you were there at that time. I remember the kind of excitement that we felt from objectively looking at such a huge plan. And I'm happy that it is getting executed in maybe a little slow, but we're still happy that it is on track, as Japanese also feel. Over to you, Ambassador Verma. You are sitting out there. You have conducted yourself through the most difficult period of the relationship because of the pandemic and the kind of exercises that we went through, both at the security as well as at the vaccine diplomacy that got generated, the supply chain resilient. It is huge pillars that has got created during your tenure. It would be interesting to know about all this from you right away.
Thank you very much, Professor Raj Chaudhary. Thanks for the lessons from Ambassador Asrani and his own journey, Ambassador Bambawale. What I'll try to do is I'll try to just mention some pointers, and probably later on, if the students are interested or anyone else is interested, I can delve on them more in details. So the first thing to understand is that this specialist strategic and global partnership that we have, many academics would say that the operative word is strategic and spatial and global. I feel differently. I feel that the main operative word happens to be partnership. So as long as we understand that it is not a transactional relationship, as long as we understand that it is just not a bilateral relationship, but it's a partnership. And how I define partnership is that if one is sad, the other should feel the pain of sadness. If another one is happy, then the first one should feel the elation of being happy. And that is how I describe the partnership. You talked about various initiatives which have been taken shape recently. The supply chain resilience initiative is one of the foremost, because that defines many other contours and ecosystems between our two countries, and indeed between in the Indo-Pacific region. Then we also saw coming up of Quad, and Quad defined many new contours between our two countries, and indeed with two more players, US and Australia. And here we are, when now we are trying to find new ways of dealing with the Indo-Pacific vision of India, or Indo-Pacific strategy of US and Japan, or now only Indo-Pacific. So all of them merge together, and they tell the same stories. There are various verticals, which I'm sure all of you must gone through and look ahead. From my perspective, today we have reached the Japanese investment into India, which is not all accounted for, of close to about $38 billion, Japan being the 5th largest investor. But there are few investments which have not been captured. They are largely going via third countries. largely Singapore and London. And these are largely going into the financial sector as well as startup segment of India. And if I take that into account, my guess is that that is another $14 billion. And then you can see that Japan is the third largest investor in India if we take this into account. As far as the bilateral trade is concerned, we are at historical high despite pandemic of $20.5 billion of bilateral trade between the two of us. Another aspect which I want to just mention is that challenges will continue, and the next main challenge will be connect between the two countries. And this youth connect is where all these students who are listening to today's conversation would be ambassadors and players in order to connect our two countries. And when we move in that direction, then you have science and technology relations, you have research and development relationships, you have human resources exchanges and relationships. Japan, all of us know Japan is getting elderly, India is still young, and therefore there is a natural tendency for us to feel that our human resources could fit into the Japanese vacuum, and they will be able to generate more goodwill for India in Japan. As far as future relation is concerned, innovation is another sector which we should look at very positively. And as I always say, that there are three pillars of that partnership, future partnership. The first pillar is co-innovation, second is co-creation, and third is co-production, wherein it finds solutions to the problems of today and the problems of the future. And then finally it takes it to the co-production phase, where the monozukeries or the industries come together and produce these items in mass scale and take our relationship forward. As we talk, you can understand the significance of the relationship. Despite pandemic, we'll be receiving our Honorable Prime Minister in Japan in another few days' time again. And this will be his third visit, which I'm very honored to organize for him and facilitate the conversation between him and his Japanese counterparts. I'll stop here, and if there are any queries, any significant mentions, I'll come back again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Verma. It was indeed very good to hear all of you give your viewpoints with this. I'll just flag one questions to each, because we'll be otherwise not having enough time for a Q&A. Ambassador Asrani ji, you have post your retirement also continued to work towards building bridges, mainly in the economic sector, by helping companies set up things out, set up their units out here or production system out here. One question that I think in the 70 years of India-Japan relations, we've been constantly asking ourselves, why is the economic partnership not grown the way we would have liked it to grow, especially when Mori and Vajpayee ji started this conversation of global India-Japan global partnership. We had thought that the economics would be the place that we would see the maximum growth. Can you delve on this for us a little?
The Japanese industry, the joint ventures that exist already in India, they have a committee of their own. They have made several presentations to our ministries concerned, government in general, giving a whole list of things, and government after government has seen that list, but we have not been able to do much to satisfy them. The trouble is, we have too many laws, too many ministries, too many state government laws. So Japanese find it very difficult to deal with all these problems in India. My view is that, as Ambassador Verma mentioned, there is on one hand aging Japan. On the other hand, when we talk of Indian manpower, I don't think we can talk of India's blue-collar workers, because our productivity is low by East Asian standards or even Southeast Asian standards. So we have to admit that. Where we rank high is the blue-collar, the professionals. Now, how to marry the Japanese economy lacking in manpower with this blue-collar professionals of India, whether it is in IT or any other sector, accounting, you take any sector, we have some of the best. And Mr. Birla told me in Bangkok, he said he has to get accountants from India. Although all the workers in Thailand are better than the workers in India, he has to get all the professional, managerial, accounting, etc. people from India. So the Japanese have to understand how to make use of at least this blue collar, workers in India into their system. And the way and the Japanese we know are allergic to allowing foreign nationals to come and stay in Japan. Unlike European countries, which have imported labor from Turkey, Iraq, Syria, anywhere, we Indians have made such name in England and USA. But Japanese don't want foreigners to settle in Japan. That is one of their problems. So the suggestion I would make is have a plan where you invite an Indian professional, IT or whichever area you want him to work in, to Japan for a 2-year course of getting, he would already learn Japanese in India, but go to Japan for a 2-year course of getting used to the Japanese systems and the Japanese personnel, the top personnel of the company he is going to work for. Then come back to India and work for the Japanese company from India without any immigration. So I seem to find, I've discussed this with some Japanese, and I think it is workable to have this system of Indians working for Japanese companies without having to go to Japan except for the 2-year learning period. The present generation has to find out whether it is workable. One thing I forgot to add, and that has happened in this century, the Japanese embassy got studies done, sample surveys done in India by independent foreign companies as to which is the most popular foreign country in India. On both the occasions, Japan was number one popular country in India. Now, this is something that both India and Japan should take advantage of. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That's a very, very important and interesting move if we can really look at allowing professionals to, do one of those smaller stints or even migrate to Japan. But I hope it works out because it is their country that has to open up for our country. Over to Ambassador Bambawale. You have also been in China, and discussing India-Japan relations in the security realm without bringing in China would be called for. So I would like you to train your understanding on these complexities that exist between China and Japan, and how does India-Japan relationship look from that angle?
Thank you very much for that question. I'll try to be brief. If right now, looking at it in 2022, things seem to be much simpler because what has happened, especially in the past year and a half, maybe a little longer period, is that China has become increasingly aggressive, particularly in its Asian neighborhood. So it is not just aggressive on the India-China border, it is also aggressive with Japan on the Senkaku Islands, with Taiwan in the South China Sea, and it is also economically aggressive, say, with a country like Australia. So I think things are simpler now. We know that the Japanese are looking at, the challenge that China poses very, very clearly. In the next few hours, I think over the next 24 hours, there's going to be some new policy initiatives which the current government of Japan is going to announce, including there is talk of 1,000 missile force There's going to be a steep enhancement of Japanese defense spending that's coming around the corner. So I think, India and Japan are on the same page, even where the challenge from China is concerned. And we definitely, both of us do not accept that China is the big brother in Asia, or that China is the hegemon in Asia. So we don't accept that kind of proposition. But I think, the fact that we are working together in several spheres has to be looked at from this angle, including the fact that, we are doing projects jointly in Sri Lanka, for example, and in some of our other neighboring countries, and that India is now comfortable enough to work with Japan even in the northeast of our country. So I think these are all pointers of how the level of comfort between India and Japan, between Tokyo and New Delhi has risen, how this comfort level has been enhanced over the last couple of decades since, the strategic partnership was formed. And the way I look at it is that even trade and investment will take off in a few years from now. So that's my approach to the question you asked. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Ambassador Verma, I cannot but help ask you about questions with respect to the cybersecurity concerns, the digital economic issues that we face. We are now trying to ink between both the countries. We have the working groups in place. So could you just delve on what do you see happening in critical technology sector, which is, as we are telling, industrialization 4.0 and society 6.0, as Japan is calling it. If you could delve on this thing, I think it will be very interesting for the audience.
Okay, when we talk of critical technologies today, they consist of critical minerals, critical metals, and critical materials. And then it comes to the critical processing. And in the process, cybersecurity is an extremely important component. So first of all, we have to look at from the point of view of securing the critical mineral and introducing critical materials which are generally lab manufactured. And only then we can move to the steps further. So rare earth happens to be one of the very important such considerations. Japan was dependent largely on China earlier for rare earth, but now there has been a diversification, and both Japan and India, particularly through their private sectors, are working on rare earth in India. We are also looking at magnets, which is another critical component in our critical technologies, where again a lot of discussions are taking place, and probably we'll be able to manufacture critical magnets soon enough for the critical technologies to be taken forward. As far as the cyber or digital domain is concerned, we have institutional mechanism already existing between the two of us, and despite pandemic, we have been able to take it forward quite a bit. It's joint working group mechanisms. Yes, they do discuss a few things from the government's perspective, but still the industry has to step in. And the industry has stepped in a big manner. If you look at the Global Development Center of Rakuten, if you look at the Global Development Center of Hitachi, Sony, Panasonic, all of them have employed Indian engineers in India, which was earlier being spoken by Ambassador Asrani, that these Indians are working for Japanese companies in India. There are 12,500 highly skilled Indians who are in Japan, and they both act as the catalyst for further India-Japan collaboration in the industry sector, in technology sector. But these Indians who are in India and working for the Japanese company also play a very important role in taking things forward. Japan is still not very comfortable with all open digital administration. So therefore, they have created a new authority known as Digital Authority, and it is led by a minister. So his main responsibility is to look at the systems in Japan which are in place and try to reduce them in a more digital friendly solutions. And then those solutions will find, of course, the Indians also collaborating with the Japanese in further exploring the systems which will be defined by the Japanese policymakers. Out of 12,500 highly skilled Indians who are here, safely I can say, though I don't have a statistics, But safely, I can say that about 10,000 of them are IT professionals, and others are management professionals and financial professionals. So there is a huge canvas waiting for us to paint in the digital domain. We have to understand how Japan works, and in order to do so, there are two mechanisms and platforms already available in India. One is known as Japan Institute of Manufacturing. There are 22 of them. And then there is another one which is known as Japan Endowed Courses. And all these platforms expose Indian workers, white collar, blue collar, all of them, into the Japanese system, Japanese way of working, as they say, which prepares them to undertake jobs, employment, or consultancy or advisory roles in Japanese companies or in Japan. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we open up for discussion, just one last afterthought of what do you think you look forward towards India-Japan relations? One or two, three things that you people would want to happen from Arjun Asrani, sir, first.
Well, on the political and defense cooperation, I think whatever I had desired is now starting to happen. I can't complain. I think Mr. Abe in this area was a very good friend. Unfortunately, the Abe period did not dwell sufficiently on the economic cooperation side. I am told, I heard Professor Taniguchi speak in the conference which was chaired by you, Shrabani, where he said that Kishida-san, the present Prime Minister, was more oriented to the economic side. I hope that the amount of goodwill that came about during the Abe period on the strategic side will also now come on the economic side. That is what I look forward to. And I think Ambassador Verma is very up to date, and he has told us which are the sectors where it is already happening, as I suggested in the professional class. I think that is the way to progress in science and technology, and we can be world leaders together. See. So, and strategic is obvious, given China's. I mean, this was not recognized in the 90s by the Japanese. It was only after the turn of the century that the Japanese started looking at China as a defense problem. And we have been getting closer and closer, and so that is a good way to go. But I think we should work harder on the economic side, economic and technology, because we also need the best technology to come into India, and it could come from Japan.
Bamawale, sir.
I would say greater people-to-people cooperation, not only in terms of travel and tourism, but also, as has been pointed out earlier, but through greater educational exchanges, through greater scientific exchanges, through greater economic exchanges. There, of course, we will have to tackle the language issue. So how we do it is something we'll have to think about.
Thank you. Ambassador Verma.
Thank you very much. There's so many things, but I'll just mention one particular thing, which is an overarching theme of anything that we need to do in the future, and that I will call as the convergence of domestic systems of the two countries for better synergy. Once we are able to achieve that, then there will be systemic convergences. Both of us will be able to work together in achieving better synergy in either of our countries or in a third country as well. Second one is enhanced youth interactions. That is a point we should not miss out on, because those people who grew on India-Japan relations way back in 70s, 80s, 90s, sooner or later they will step down, and we will need more youth to take over this relationship after that.
Thank you. We have a few seconds, in fact, left. I see one raised hand immediately. May I ask Abhijit to just ask the question quickly? You need not introduce yourself.
Okay, ma'am. My question is to Ambassador Bombawale. I wanted to ask with regards to trilateral cooperation between Japan, South Korea, and India. Back in 2012, you were Joint Secretary East in the Ministry of External Affairs, and you were there when Track 2 dialogue was initiated between India, Japan, and South Korea, between IDSA, KNDA, Korea National Diplomatic Academy, and Tokyo Foundation. So they had in those talks, the 2 years that those talks did get hold. They had discussed SLOC, sea lanes of communication, Indo-Pacific, and even the importance of democracies coming together and cooperating more intensively. But we saw that in 2014, this more or less simmered down, especially with Japan and South Korea, the issues that they had. So what was India's reaction then? And I would also like to know now that Kishida has come to lead Japan, and we have Yoon Suk Yeol in Korea. Both of them are very reciprocal towards each other in terms of the history. Yoon Suk Yeol has said that he wants greater cooperation with Japan, and Kishida was one of the
Abhijit,
yes,
you are making a record and just ask a clear question to.
Okay, so I would like to say, I would like to ask what was India's role then, and if India could do something today with regards to initiating this Track 2 dialogue, because then we hope that this could turn into a Track 1 dialogue as well. So could it start today as well?
Yeah. So I'll be quick to say what I want to on this subject. That at that time we had felt that there were synergies between the three countries, which we would try to explore if we can sort of harmonize the interests and the synergies between the three countries. We started at Track 2, but as you rightly pointed out, it seems to have fizzled out. The reason for that, of course, is Japan and South Korea need to be able to work together. I don't know what's happening right now. I'll leave it to Ambassador Verma to fill us in on that. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Verma, Ambassador Verma, any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, see, there are issues which are bilateral in nature with Japan and South Korea are dealing with, and they have good communication links. In the media, it doesn't look like, but they are very close. There are good communication links. They're trying to resolve their bilateral issues. When it comes to an alliance kind of a situation, US also drops in for further forging the relationship between South Korea and Japan. As far as India is concerned, India is seen as a major player in the Indo-Pacific region, and that is where we're coming. As far as Track 2 is concerned, due to pandemic, we had lost quite a steam, and we will need to rebuild on that.
I have four. Gargi, can you introduce and ask a question?
Yes. Good afternoon, ma'am. My question is to India's ambassador of India to Japan. Sir, my question is that as we have seen that recently Russia's deepening influence in Asian region is creating a sort of vacuum for India. Meanwhile, China and the US are capitalizing on the opportunities that are arising, be the bilateral issues between Azerbaijan and Armenia, or the Kazakhstan issue. So my question is, what lessons can India take from Japan and carve out its own significant presence in the region without getting influenced, or until now we used to follow Russian leads? So how can India now go on independently, finding its own way?
Well, thank you very much for the question. But what I feel is that you think that India is not doing enough. But please believe me, we have our own national security interests in perspective, on our mind, and all these countries that you mentioned. We have very active outreach to them. Some places with other countries, some places we are going directly to that country and that region. And we have been able to safeguard our national interests in those regions so far.
Thank you so much, sir. And I have a lot of faith in our country. So definitely that's nowhere. Thank you so much for entertaining my question. Thank you, ma'am.
Nitya?
Yes, sir. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. So, hello, my name is Nitya. So, I have a question that sir suggested that we can strengthen the Indo-Japan relationships by youth interaction. But how, like, I'm a Japanese student, so it's very difficult for me to interact with other Japanese officials due to the language barrier. Like, there are not many applications, or there are not many sources through which I can interact with them and strengthen and know about their culture very much. So is there anything that can be done so that the youth interaction can be more simplified and we can interact very freely?
There are a number of platforms already available, Mr. Stubi, and one can use them. There are alumni associations all over India of those students who came to Japan, studied Japanese or any other subject and went back to India. So that is one way of keeping in touch with the changes in the Japanese culture and Japanese society. Another, of course, I'm sure our colleagues in the Japanese embassy in New Delhi must be reaching out to targeted youth population in India to see how they can inculcate better interactions between the two youth societies. But, sorry.
We got less than half of your pay. We should take less class or something. If I mean for 10 years, more than 10 years.
Is someone trying to talk in between? Please raise your hands and talk, please. We can't do this kind of exercise in a virtual format.
Can I go ahead?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. So the other point is that we have to look at the student exchanges, which form a very important part of the entire youth-to-youth exchanges and trying to develop understanding of the culture on both sides. There could be traditional models in which the students from a university go to another university and try to be there. There could be very non-conventional ways of doing the same through virtual mode. And many of these youth societies have got together through virtual mode as well. Just to let you know about the Japanese language, in 2019, which was the last normal year so far, we had 32,000 Japanese learners who took the Japanese language proficiency test, which is a very good number. And therefore, that number could further the cultural understanding of Japan in India. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Chandrali, Nitya, let's move on to other people. We can't have you only questioning. Yeah, Chandrali, you had raised hands.
Hello, thank you for today's insightful session. My question is regarding, today we were talking about the India-Japan economic exchanges and how both the countries can strengthen their economic partnership. In this partnership, I want to know that what are the policy restrictions Indian companies or Indian startups faces when they want to set up those businesses in Japan? Is there is it feasible for them to set their businesses in Japan, and how to address that gap? I think Ambassador Verma is can best answer this question.
I'll be very quick. I have another engagement, and the visitor is already sitting in the visitors room. Yes, there is a huge potential of Indian startups to come to Japan. Problems are similar but not the same, which means innovations could follow the same path, but the innovated solutions could be different. In Japan, there is an entire ecosystem of startups. There is a lot of incentives which the Japanese city prefectural and the central government provides, including 6 months free of any rental space, access to labs, no taxation. So there are various incentives which I can go on if we have time. But yes, Indian startups will find a very mature startup ecosystem in Japan. Numbers are not that big as in India. Number of unicorns is not that big as in India. But nevertheless, an ecosystem exists here, which is very preferential towards new startup incomers.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, ambassadors. We reached our thing. I must leave Verma, Ambassador Verma off from his thing. He has other compelling duties. thank you so much for joining us, and thank you other ambassadors, who have, done a lot for this relationship. Thank you. And I have the student to give the vote of thanks to for this session?
Yes, ma'am. So I would like to extend my gratitude to everyone for taking the time from the busy schedule to grace the event. I extend a hearty vote of thanks to former ambassadors Arjun Asrani and Gautam Bambawale and Ambassador Sanjay Kumar Verma for sharing their knowledge and opinion today. Thank you for attending this session. I hope to see many of you in our next session on culture, civilization, and people connect at 2 p.m. today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you again. Bambawale, thank you so much.
For your information.
Thank you, Asrani ji. Thank you so much for joining us.